Let me say something that I think most makeup advice is too polite to say. You might be spending 20 minutes every single morning on a routine that is actively working against you. Not a little, not in some minor, barely noticeable way. I mean genuinely, physically adding years to your face. By settling into lines, by flattening features, by doing the exact opposite of what you think it's doing while you're standing at the mirror putting it on. And the reason this keeps happening is simple. Most of us learn to apply makeup for a face we had 20 years ago. Nobody updates the instruction manual. Nobody sits you down and says, "Hey, everything you learned is now wrong." So we keep doing what we've always done, and slowly it stops working, and we add a little more product trying to fix it, and it gets worse, and we still can't name why. That stops today. These 5 mistakes are the ones I see most often, and some of them are going to surprise you, because they're things you've probably been told are helping. There's one in particular, mistake number 3, that genuinely shocked every single woman I've shown it to, because it's sold as a solution, and it's actually one of the fastest ways to add a decade to your face. We'll get there. Here's the deal I'm making with you right now. By the time this video ends, you'll know exactly what to look for in your own routine, what to stop, what to swap, and how to fix 3 of these 5 mistakes tomorrow morning with things you already own. No new products required. Not yet. Just new information. That's worth staying for. Welcome back to Style After 60, where we get into the real mechanics of what actually works, not just what sounds good. If that kind of honest, specific advice is what you're here for, hit subscribe. It means more than you'd think, and it keeps this kind of content coming. Now, let's get into it. The first mistake is heavy, matte, all-over powder. And I want to handle this one carefully, because powder isn't the enemy. The way most of us were taught to use it is, here's what I mean. For decades, the advice was, set your foundation with powder, all over, generously, to make it last. That advice made sense when it was written. It was written for skin in its 20s and 30s, skin that produces enough natural oil to push back against a layer of powder and stay balanced. Powder on that skin reads as smooth, matte, finished. Here's the mechanism on skin that's matured. The equation flips. After 60, most skin produces significantly less oil than it did 30 years ago. It's drier, sometimes almost paper dry in patches. A layer of powder on top of dry skin does one specific thing. It clings. And it doesn't cling smoothly. It clings to texture. Every fine line around the eye, every crease at the corner of the mouth, every smile line across the cheek. Powder finds those and settles into them like silt settling into the bottom of a riverbed. By mid-afternoon, if you've used powder generously all over, those creases are not subtler than they were in the morning. They're announced. Makeup artists in 2026 are describing the biggest shift in mature makeup as a deliberate move away from heavy coverage toward what they call suede skin, a soft focus finish that mimics real skin rather than trying to coat it. That language, suede skin, is new, but the idea behind it isn't. Powder has never served a dry, mature face the way we were told it did. We're just finally saying it out loud. The fix is surgical, not total. You don't abandon powder. You use it only where you actually need it. Typically the T-zone, the area across the forehead and down the nose, which genuinely can get shiny even on drier skin because of sunscreen or primer. Everywhere else, leave the foundation or tinted moisturizer alone. Choose a finely milled translucent powder rather than a heavy matte one, and apply it sparingly with a fluffy brush. The more diffuse the brush, the lighter the application. Do it tomorrow morning. Before you reach for the powder, ask yourself where you are actually shiny. Not where you might get shiny later. Where you are shiny right now. Powder only those spots. Then put the powder brush down. That one change. Powder on the T-zone only, not all over, is the single fastest fix on this entire list. And here's something worth knowing. If you've already gone too heavy with powder and your makeup looks chalky or flat, a light mist of setting spray, or even plain water spray, brings the radiance back immediately. Knowing that fix exists makes experimenting with less powder a lot less scary. But powder, as frustrating as it can be, is not the deepest problem on this list. The next one is. Mistake 2 is the foundation trap. Specifically, the belief that more coverage means better coverage. I understand exactly how this trap works because I've watched it happen in real time. You look in the mirror and something's bothering you. The skin tone looks uneven, a little sallow, a little tired. So you reach for a more covering foundation. It helps, briefly. Then, 6 months later, you need something even more covering because the first one started to look cakey, and now the new, heavier one is settling into the lines you were trying to hide, so you're applying more of it to cover that. And it's getting worse, and you genuinely don't know why because you're using the most covering foundation on the market. I sat down with a client once. I'm going to call her Margaret, not her real name, who had been doing exactly this for 4 years. The foundation she was wearing by the time I met her was so full coverage that by noon it had settled into every single crease around her eyes and mouth and was casting shadows there that made her look, not to be unkind, genuinely exhausted. Not older in some vague way, actually tired. She looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days, and she'd been up since 6 applying a $68 foundation trying to look fresher. Here's the mechanism. Heavy foundation doesn't hide wrinkles. It settles into them like snow in sidewalk cracks, making every line more pronounced. The denser the formula, the more it has to go somewhere as the day progresses and the skin moves. And where it goes is into lines. This is not a product flaw. It's physics. You cannot put a thick substance on a textured surface and expect it to stay smooth and even all day. The best foundation for mature skin in 2026 is a luminous, buildable liquid or serum foundation rather than a matte powder one. Expert favorites include Ilia Super Serum Skin Tint and Jones Road What the Foundation. Both are lightweight, hydrating, and they give the skin a finish that reads as skin rather than as something applied on top of it. That distinction matters more than coverage level. The right moisturizer applied before foundation makes a visible difference. It prepares the skin for the makeup to glide on rather than settle into dry areas. Prep is not optional on mature skin. It's the foundation before the foundation. The fix is to go lighter, not heavier, when something looks off. If your skin looks uneven, add a hydrating serum underneath your current foundation before you go straight to a heavier product. If the skin is prepped and hydrated, a lighter formula will often cover more naturally than a heavy one because it moves with the skin instead of sitting on top of it. Do it tomorrow morning. Swap your current foundation for a tinted moisturizer, just for 1 day. Not permanently, just as a test. Look at your face at noon and again at 3 in the afternoon and see where the product has traveled. You may find that the lighter product has moved less than the heavier one, not more. That's the counterintuitive reality of foundation on mature skin. And this is the one I promised you at the beginning. This is the mistake that has genuinely surprised every woman I've walked through it with. Because it's marketed as a solution, it's sold as a brightener, it's in every beauty editor's must-have list, and on mature skin, in the wrong form, it's one of the most aging things you can put on your face. Mistake 3 is applying concealer too light and too thick under the eyes. Here's why this one lands so hard. We were taught for years that brightness equals youth. Bright under eye area means awake, alert, youthful. So we reach for the lightest concealer we can find and we layer it on, and for a few minutes in the morning mirror it looks okay, and then 2 hours later we look in the bathroom mirror at work and we look 20 years older than we did when we left the house, and we have no idea why. The mechanism is two-part, and both parts are working against you simultaneously. First, a concealer 2 or 3 shades lighter than your skin tone creates what's sometimes called a reverse raccoon effect. Instead of darkening the under eye, it creates a white circle of light that draws the eye directly to exactly the area you were trying to minimize. The contrast is what the eye catches, not the darkness underneath. You've traded one problem for a brighter, more obvious one. Second, and this is the physical part, heavy concealer under the eye settles into lines and actually makes the under eye area look more tired, not less. The under eye skin is the thinnest skin on the face, typically less than 0.5 millimeter compared to several millimeters on the cheek. It moves constantly. Every blink, every squint, every smile sends tiny ripples through that skin. Thick concealer has nowhere to go when that skin moves except into the fine lines and the creases. And by mid-morning, you have product sitting in every crease in a way that actually creates shadows that weren't there before you applied it. The right concealer for mature under-eye skin should be just one shade lighter than your foundation, with a peach or pink undertone to counteract darkness, and the right amount is far less than most of us use, not a full sweep across the entire under-eye. A small amount, precisely placed, at the inner corner and directly under the darkest point. Prep the area with eye cream first. The concealer needs something to glide over rather than something to grip and crease into. This single prep step changes the entire behavior of any under-eye concealer. Do it tomorrow morning. Before you apply concealer, put a small amount of eye cream under the eye and let it sink in for 60 seconds. Then apply a tiny amount of concealer, less than you think you need. Only at the inner corner and the darkest point, not all the way across. Blend outward gently. Then stop. Don't add more. See what it looks like at noon. I would bet real money it looks better at noon than your current method, not worse. That's mistake 3. And I'll be honest. It took me years of watching women's faces change throughout the day before I fully understood how much damage the bright and light concealer advice was doing. It's not your fault. The advice was wrong. Mistake 4. And this one is about brows, which means it's about the entire upper third of your face. Let me start with something most lists skip over. Why brows matter more than almost anything else on the face, before we get to what's going wrong with them. Brows are the primary structure that frames the eyes and organizes the upper face. They give the face its emotional signature, the resting expression it carries through the day, even when you're not actively expressing anything. When brows are thin, or faded, or absent, the face loses its organizing line. Sparse or faded brows can make the face appear less structured, which in turn adds years. And restoring that structure through carefully filled brows can completely transform the eye area, lifting it and restoring balance in a way almost nothing else achieves as quickly. So we fill them in, which is exactly right. The mistake isn't filling in brows. The mistake is how most women over 60 were taught to do it, which is drawing a line rather than building a texture. Here's the mechanism. A drawn, solid line across the brow has one fundamental problem. It reads as artificial because natural brows aren't solid lines. They're collections of individual hairs, some thicker, some finer, with gaps between them and natural variation in color from the front of the brow to the tail. A solid drawn line eliminates all of that variation. The result is a brow that looks painted on, which draws attention to itself as a painted-on thing, which in turn draws the eye to the surrounding skin in contrast, which is the opposite of what you wanted. You've traded my brow is thin for that is very obviously a drawn brow, and neither one is serving you. Harsh, overly drawn brows create a severe look that ages the face and draws attention to sagging skin around the eye area. Soft, feathery strokes that mimic natural hair growth work much better. Think enhancement, not replacement. I want to tell you about a session I still think about because it illustrates this better than any description I can give. I was working with a woman, I'll call her Joan, who was 67, had always worn a strong, defined brow, and genuinely couldn't understand why she suddenly looked harder than she meant to. Nothing else in her routine had changed. We sat down and looked at her brows in a magnifying mirror, and the issue was immediately clear. She'd been drawing a solid, dark line across both brows that was about a shade too dark for her current hair color, and had no individual strokes in it at all. When she was 45 and her hair was darker, that formula had worked, At 67, with naturally lightened hair, the contrast between the drawn brow and the surrounding skin had become stark enough to read as harsh rather than polished. We switched to a lighter taupe brow pencil, and I showed her the feathering technique. Short upward strokes instead of a sweeping line. She did one brow, looked in the mirror, and said, "Oh." Just that, one syllable, because she could see instantly what had changed. Same face, same 20 seconds of effort in the morning, completely different result. The fix is in the tool and the technique together. Switch from a brow pencil used in sweeping lines to a pencil with a very fine tip used in short, upward strokes. Each stroke mimicking one hair. Gray or taupe shades often look more natural than dark brown or black on mature skin. As hair lightens naturally with age, a brow product one shade darker than your current hair color tends to read as filled in rather than drawn on. More than 2 shades darker, and the contrast tips into harsh, no matter how carefully you apply it. There's a second detail that most people miss, and it matters as much as the color. The front of the brow should always be the softest point, the least defined, the front third. Closest to the nose should barely register as product. The definition should build toward the arch and the tail. Doing it the other way, heavy at the front and fading toward the tail, creates the optical illusion of a flat, lowered brow, which visually presses the entire eye area downward. Arch toward the tail, soft at the front. Every time, without exception. Do it tomorrow morning. Before you touch your brows, hold a pencil vertically against the side of your nose. Where the pencil aligns with your brow is where your brow should start, nowhere closer to center. Then look at where your natural arch sits and place your darkest application there, not at the front. Everything toward the nose gets only the lightest touch, almost like a suggestion rather than a statement. That one change in where the emphasis goes shifts the entire read of the brow. And the brow, more than almost anything else, shifts the entire read of the face. And the last one, mistake 5, is the one that makes all 4 of the others worse when it's missing and better when it's there. It's the step that most women skip entirely, usually because nobody ever explained the actual reason it matters, and primer has been marketed in such a trend-chasing Instagram beauty way that it stopped sounding relevant to real women with real routines. Mistake 5 is going straight to foundation on unprepped skin. I get why this happens. You're busy. You have 30 minutes, maybe less, and primer sounds like an extra, optional step invented by beauty companies to sell more product. You've gotten by without it for years. Maybe you tried it once, it pilled under your foundation, and you threw it in a drawer and never went back. That experience, by the way, is more common than you'd think, and I'm going to explain exactly why it happens so you don't repeat it. Here's the actual mechanism of why primer matters specifically for mature skin, and it's not about trend or extra steps. Skin in your 60s has a fundamentally different surface texture than skin in your 30s did. It's drier, in most cases, significantly so. The surface is less even. The pores look slightly more visible because the skin around them has lost some of the collagen scaffolding that used to hold them tight from underneath. And on that surface, without prep, foundation does exactly what it would do if you painted over rough, unprimed wood. It catches in every groove, moves unevenly into every texture variation, and by midday looks nothing like what it looked like when you first applied it. More than that, on dry skin, foundation can start to crack and separate in the places that flex most. Around the mouth, around the eyes, which is the specific result that adds the most visible years to a face. Primer creates a smoother surface, helps makeup last longer, and keeps foundation from sinking into lines. A good hydrating primer acts almost like a blur filter, softening edges and creating a radiant base. Think of the difference between painting on rough drywall versus a smooth, prepped surface. The same paint, completely different result. Now here's why so many women had a bad primer experience and swore off it. The wrong primer for your skin type is worse than no primer. Most of the primers that get the most attention, and that were most aggressively marketed over the past decade, are silicone-based pore-filling primers. They were designed for younger, oilier skin, trying to create a poreless, perfectly smooth canvas, and they do that job reasonably well on that skin type. On dry, mature skin, heavy silicone primer causes foundation to ball up and pill on the surface instead of adhering smoothly, because silicone and the water-based products underneath it don't combine, they separate. That pilling looks dramatically worse than no primer at all, which is exactly the experience that turned so many women off the category entirely. And nobody told them it was a formula mismatch, not a universal truth. The fix is matching your primer to your foundation, a water-based primer with a water-based foundation, and a silicone-based primer with a silicone-based foundation. Mixing the two causes the pilling and breakdown most women experienced. For mature skin specifically, a hydrating water-based primer or a moisturizing serum that doubles as a primer is almost always the better starting point. Dermatologist Dr. Shireen Idris has described the right primer as serving as skincare and makeup in one, locking in hydration while giving products more staying power. That framing is the most useful one I've found. Think of primer not as an extra cosmetic step, but as the final layer of skincare that also happens to hold everything placed on top of it in position all day. When you think about it that way, skipping it starts to seem like skipping moisturizer. Technically optional, but visibly making everything else less effective. The specific fix, if you're starting fresh or starting over. Look for a hydrating primer or a serum primer hybrid. Apply it after your moisturizer and before your foundation, and give it a full 90 seconds to absorb and set before you go in with any foundation on top. That waiting time matters. Foundation applied over wet primer moves and separates. Over set primer, it adheres and stays. Bobbi Brown Vitamin-Enriched Face Base is widely recommended for this purpose, as is Ilia's Bright Start Radiant Priming Serum, which works as both skincare and primer and removes the formula matching concern entirely. Do it tomorrow morning, after your moisturizer, before your foundation. Simply wait. Count to 90. Touch your face lightly. It should feel set rather than wet. Then apply your foundation on top of that set surface and watch how differently it spreads and sits. You're not adding a product yet, you're adding 90 seconds. That's the whole experiment, and I'd be surprised if you don't notice a visible difference by the time you check your makeup at noon. Here is the real secret underneath all 5 of these mistakes, the one idea that ties them together. Every single mistake on this list comes from applying makeup designed for skin that produces, holds moisture, and sits in a way that 60-year-old skin simply doesn't anymore. Not worse, different. The skin you have now reflects light differently, holds product differently, and responds to hydration differently than the skin you had at 35. And the makeup advice most of us grew up with. Heavy coverage, matte finish, set with powder all over, bright light concealer, solid brow liner, was written for that earlier skin. The shift that changes everything is moving from coverage first thinking to texture first thinking. Stop asking, how do I cover this? And start asking, how do I make this surface look like healthy skin? Healthy skin is slightly luminous. It's not flat. It has movement. And the product choices that support that. Lighter formulas, cream textures, strategic powder, precise concealer, feathered brows, hydrated primer. Follow naturally from that one reframe. You're not applying less makeup. You're applying smarter makeup. There's a difference, and it shows. Every single one of these 5 mistakes has an easy fix, most of them free, most of them starting tomorrow morning, and the difference between a makeup routine that's working with your face and one that's quietly working against it is not subtle. It's the kind of difference that shows up in photos, in mirrors, in the way people respond to you when you walk into a room. You've put time and money and genuine effort into your routine for years. You deserve for that effort to actually land the way you intended it to. And now you have the information to make sure it does. If this explains something that's been bothering you for a while, but you couldn't name, give this video a like. It genuinely helps more women find this channel. And subscribe to Style After 60 for more of this every single week. Tell me in the comments which of these 5 was yours. The powder, the heavy foundation, the under-eye concealer, the brows, or the skipped primer. I read every comment. And if you're brave enough to tell me you were doing all 5, I see you, and I promise you're not alone.